Hello folks, and welcome to another video. In this video I'll be taking a sort of retrospective look at the Sony DualShock 3 controller. Now this controller came after the 6-axis, which was the original controller for the PlayStation 3. So you might be asking, why did the original controller not come straight out as the DualShock 3? Well, there were some legal issues relating to the rumble technology in these controllers that meant Sony couldn't include that original hardware. Hence, it was just called the 6-axis at that point. And the 6-axis refers to its ability to use motion controls in games. So it had 6 different axes that it could move along and would pick up the motion controls from that. Not many games used it particularly well, but some used it fairly well for things like moving. If you're walking on a board or something, you might go like that to try to kind of steady yourself. So what are the main features of this controller? Not a huge amount of change from the original DualShock in terms of the D-pad, your analog sticks. You've got your X, square, triangle, circle buttons, start and select, but you do now have this PlayStation button here that both turns on the console, can be used to turn off the machine, and will also take the machine to like a main menu of the system where you can then interact for settings and music and movies and that sort of thing. You've got your L1, R1, L2 and R2. Now, one flaw with this controller is the fact that these triggers, your fingers can easily slip off of them. Hence why I put these additions on there. What happens then is your fingers are actually gripped quite nicely on there, so you can hold them there and they won't slip off unless you really push hard on the triggers. In terms of shape, it's a fairly small controller, but it's comfortable enough. It's definitely not necessarily built for Western hands, but it does do its job okay. The DualShock 4 and the DualSense are better controllers for definite in terms of their size at the very least. One thing this controller has over the top of all those other controllers is actually battery life. The battery life on these is excellent. You're looking at probably between 30 and 50 hours depending on use. That's a long old time from one little lithium battery located in there. Now, another downside is that the springs in these triggers can actually fail. There's one spring that does the trigger, and I believe it's located on the outside here, and that can actually fail, leading to them being limp and not coming back. So my advice would be, if that happens, you open up the controller. It is a little bit fiddly, but buy 4 springs or 3 springs, depending on how many broke, and replace 2 in each then. The trigger slightly stiffer then, but you've doubled the life of those springs by having twice as many, essentially. So in terms of analog sticks, they don't seem to suffer particularly badly from stick drift. This one here is slightly loose. You can see it sits slightly at an angle of where it should. But this controller I've had for, I can't even think now, must be at least 10, 15 years. And it hasn't suffered any stick drift as of yet. So you've got your DualShock in there as well, which is it's just your normal DualShock that you would have had in the other controllers. The big difference here really is the triggers are a little bit better. You can now charge it. Obviously, it's Bluetooth and it does have 6-axis controls. But other than that, not a huge departure. Microsoft made large departures from their original Xbox controllers, although those controllers were somewhat derided, so I suppose that would make sense that they would make big sort of leaps. But not a huge leap for the controller, considering the leap that Sony was touting for the PlayStation 3 console itself. Now, what do I give this controller out of 10? So, in terms of ergonomics, I haven't got enormous hands. This controller does fit quite comfortably. I do actually prefer the analog sticks in the Xbox arrangement, but this is absolutely fine. I've played many hundreds of games like that. I do like the standard layout of the buttons and stuff. The triggers I wish were a little bit better, and maybe it'd be nice if the analog sticks were concave in the middle so your thumbs didn't come off so easily. So I'd give this controller probably an 8 out of 10. The reason it doesn't get 10 is because of those issues I mentioned, but the reason it gets such a high score is because it does last a long time on one charge, and it is fairly nice and light without feeling cheap. What's it like to use in 2024? Well, coming back from a DualSense, this can be perhaps slightly jarring. The DualSense is the better built controller. For example, it has a grippiness to it, which makes it sit nicer in your hands and whatnot. But this is still a really good controller, and if you were to use this with any other system, I think you'd still be pretty happy with it. Even if the design does harken all the way back to the original SNES, where Sony were in an ill-fated agreement with them to produce a CD add-on for that system. And Sony took some of the licensing from the controller and made it their own. And they've been using this button layout ever since. So that's been my 2024 review of the DualShock 3 controller with 6-axis functionality. Now, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please remember to hit that like button, leave me a comment, subscribe, share this video on social media, and check out my Patreon. I want to thank you very much for watching, and have a great day. I'll see you in the next video.